I know this might be difficult for some people to hear and or understand, but when he passed, I know that he was relieved. And because of that, I was relieved. Being able to have closure with him no longer suffering did make me more available to enjoy the life that I'm living right now.
All right, Mary, welcome to Winnie's Money Bites.
Thank you so much, Minky. I'm so excited to be here. I love this topic and all topics that you cover on your podcast. So super psyched to be here.
Yay! So we've had some interesting conversations in the canteen on everything from visualization, materialization, all of that. And you came across in one of our discussions some really interesting topics about aging, not only ourselves aging, but also our parents aging. So I'd love to delve into that world. But before we do that, what is a one-liner about yourself?
Awesome. Cool. So a one-liner about myself is that I am both a witness to and an active participant in what it means to be participating in the amazing splendor of what it is to be a human being on this planet. That's a one-liner about me.
Sorry, pull that apart. What does that mean?
That means that I'm so much more than the roles that I could dictate to you in terms of like, oh, I'm this, I am an employee at Meta, I am a sister, I'm a wife. Like, I think like we all are so much more than the roles that we play. And so I'm trying to answer your question by saying like, oh, I am this active participant in the magical splendor of what it means to be alive.
Wow. That is amazing.
It might be different than what you typically get.
Do you think who you are changes with time, or is it consistent?
I think it's more of a revelation. Like as time goes on, it's more like because of what we learn and what we experience, it's more like a truth that's revealed to you. And while on a very fundamental level, I think it's always a constant, it's more about how you learn about that thing versus like who you actually are.
Oh, so you're also doing self-discovery, not just external people discovering you.
I mean, aren't we all doing discovery both about ourselves and the world at large? And I think the more we learn about ourselves, the more answers we have about the world around us.
This is going to be a very interesting conversation. I'm loving it already.
Awesome.
Okay. Usually I follow up with what's a trivia about yourself that people don't know?
And what's funny, Minky, is that I thought I was going to have a super original answer, but listening to some of your most recent recordings, this is not super original, but it's still awesome. I'm an identical twin sister.
Does she also share sort of your outlooks on life, or is she completely different?
No, we have a pretty similar viewpoint on how things are. Like we're very much on this journey together. And one of the most special parts of that relationship is that we essentially like coach each other through all of these discoveries that we make. And very much at times of need, it's more like coaching down or like coaching off the ledge kind of thing. So it's almost like we use the learnings that we've shared our entire lives to kind of like help in the moment with kind of like when you wrestle with some ideas and some really difficult moments in life, it's almost like we're each other's coaching partners to kind of keep these kinds of teachings alive and just keep it alive for each other. And that's one of the most unique and special parts of that relationship.
Love it. Absolutely love it. I don't want to get too capitalistic on you, but what do you do at Meta?
Oh, that I'm happy to explore capitalistic everything. No topics are off the table, which is what I love about our relationship, Minky. So what do I do at Meta? So I'm in my second role at Meta, and the role I'm playing right now, which I love so much, is you might have heard of the metaverse and VR and MR and all those awesome acronyms. So my job at the moment is to help our external partners in selling all of this stuff, MR, VR, metaverse, all that stuff, selling that stuff to enterprise. So incorporating VR into the way we work, I'm part of the team that's trying to make that a reality across the globe.
Oh, you're definitely the one that is bringing in the big bucks. You're the one who's actually able to make the grease the engine and make it roll.
We're certainly hoping so. We're relying on a lot of those bucks to like bring this vision to reality. And we're hoping that one day, no, I'm not going to say we're hoping. We're betting on the fact that this thing is going to take off.
I love it when you work on something that you're so passionate about, but that wasn't always the case. So would love to go through your experience and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Let's start from the beginning. You're in the middle of the dot com boom. You're working at PricewaterhouseCooper and you say, I am going to go be a waitress in New York. What's happening here?
Yeah, remember being young and idealistic, Minky, and not thinking that anything mattered. It's just such a wonderful time I like to think about, but also so grateful that I have a little bit more perspective now. So, okay. So, going back to the dot com boom, I was really, really lucky. You know, all things in life pretty much boil down to timing, or at least a little bit of a factor. So, I was lucky enough to graduate undergrad during the dot com boom. I mean, there were just jobs coming out of the woodwork, and it just seemed like the heyday that would last forever, right? So, my first job out of college was with PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the big, at the time, one of the big six, I think now it's big four, accounting firms. And I was a IT consultant or IT auditor, whatever. And, you know, because that was my first job out of college, it's that whole like, oh my God, real world, and real world kind of sucks. And like, this is so different than what I expected or what like my college life was like. And I even did an internship with that company. And that was like really just a bunch of happy hours. And a trip to Disney World. So yeah, it was kind of a crash landing at my first job. It was like a big reality check. And the truth is, I really wasn't. I was doing the right thing in terms of having a really great prestigious job and getting a job right after college, but it just didn't. I wasn't excited by it. Didn't love it. And you know, looking at the bank accounts and the balance sheets, I knew that I could kind of take some time off and just live and be a waitress in New York, which you know could be really fun. And it's just so funny when you look back at your younger days, and I'm sure you have a version of this where you're like, wow, you really kind of put a lot of faith in yourself and the universe, and like not worried so much about a gap in your resume or what this might look like to a prospective employer later down the line. Luckily, I wasn't encumbered by all of that. So yeah, I did like the idealistic thing of like left PwC about a year and a half after starting to work, and just did this like fun life waitressing, and like would have some dinner shifts where after work all of us would just go out and stay out until the middle, gosh, the wee hours of the night. I look back, I don't even recognize myself. But yeah, kind of really experienced like NYC living and really enjoying kind of this like bohemian lifestyle, if you will, which I don't know, some people might be like, you can't really be bohemian in New York on a waitress's salary, but I don't know even know where I'm going with this. But I was just trying to live and have fun and not worry so much about corporate and just kind of like do whatever I felt like. And I did that for a little bit and then came back to the real world. Yes, air quotes, the real world, and just got a little smarter about stuff.
It's interesting how you're bifurcating between the real world and, I guess, the unreal world. The unreal bohemian life, would you ever go back to it? Or is it just a good time in memory?
Oh, yeah. So I love that question because that becomes a question of like, what does my retirement look like? Right. And
Ah,
how do I envision not being on someone else's grid essentially? Right. Or like, I'm the one that makes all the rules. Cause it's like, we can get into the discussion of like, what does retirement even mean? And I think I've been talking a lot to my friends and colleagues about this. And so I think just to align on a definition, or rather what it means to me, retirement means you're no longer on anyone else's schedule but your own. It doesn't mean that you're not working. Like, for instance, I envision a lot of my retirement doing projects and working and earning money, but just in different ways that I'm not doing now. So, yes, I will return to the bohemian life, but now it's 100% on my terms. And it's more, there's no concern about like, oh, gap in my resume, or what am I going to do, or how does this look? That will not be a concern anymore. So yes, I will be going back. It's just in completely different terms and what it looks like, etc.
love it. Okay, so you decided to come back to the real world and you switch industries. You go into the magazine sector. What I found interesting during this point is your career satisfaction graph takes like a little boop, a little bump. But it was actually your fellow colleagues, managers, etc., that were sharing, hey, you might be underemployed. What was that feedback like? And when was the realization, oh, maybe I should be striving for something bigger, better?
Yeah, for sure. So let me set like the broader picture here and kind of kind of explain to your listeners how this sounds funny, how my life works or my viewpoint or how I see things, right? So, yeah, because if you look at that chart, you'll be like, so what's going on here? It seems like that you really didn't put too much thought into this, which actually is true. So to set the broader picture, my life is very much like, cool, like let's see what happens kind of vibe. Like I'm not too concerned about like what's going to happen. I don't have these like 5, 10, 15 year plans. I never did. I think my dad said it best because obviously like I inherited this kind of mentality from him. He's like, listen, we're just like in a canoe in the middle of the ocean with like no oars, right? You're just kind of going wherever. And so, a lot of times in life that could be pretty handy because that means you're flexible and kind of like cool with how things go. But I do understand that there's a cost to that too, Minky, right? And part of that cost is represented in what you just said. There was like a big period of my career where if I really analyzed it and took enough time to think about it, I was underemployed, right? So for a big chunk of my early career, I was working in magazine publishing. And for you younger viewer or listeners out there, you might be thinking, what's a magazine? Haha, LOL, that's my joke. So I'm talking paper magazines, ones you flip through in the doctor's office or while you're waiting. Yeah, so that back in the day, that was much more prominent than it is today. And what's amazing about working in that field, I'd say it was like from 2005 to 2014, give or take, is that every single year in that job, the decline was just so obvious, right? Maybe it was a little bit more subtle in the mid 2000s, but as we got closer to 2010, et cetera, the decline was really sharp. And it was clear, the writing was on the wall that listen, you got to get out of here, like as soon as you can. But, I was very much like, it is a good job and I'm good at it. I was like in production. I was helping like the TLDR or like the long and short of what I did there was, I would take advertising and make sure it was like running opposite editorial that wasn't conflicting. Like you wouldn't want to run a car ad opposite a story about car crashes, right? Things like that. And so it was actually quite satisfying for me. I love puzzles and this was like the ultimate puzzle. And so Minky, I think that's one of the reasons I stayed there so long is because I actually really enjoyed the work, but I was able to notice through my own kind of intuition, but also comments from colleagues and managers that like, hey, like in so many words, you're kind of like more capable than this job. Like what keeps you from outward seeking other opportunities? And I was very much like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I was having a good time, definitely making decent money to like have a nice lifestyle. I mean, I wasn't like renting out corporate jets or anything, but I definitely was satisfied. So, but I did start kind of paying attention to that, Minky. And then something happened that completely rocked my world. And essentially, to use a metaphor, essentially was like a rocket ship waiting for me that I got in and then everything took off from there. And that what that was I discovered through a company called Own the Room, shout out and much love to them, that I am really, really good at public speaking and actually could make a living from it. And like from that moment is where everything in my life and career took off.
Wait, Mary, sorry. Sorry to interrupt. I think you're actually going to where I was going to ask the question. You had a full-time job and then public speaking comes in as a hobby or as a side gig, or how did that come in?
Good question. So I'm in this magazine production job and I get an email from HR saying like, hey, do you want to come to this workshop to learn about public speaking, to become a better public speaker? I'm like, oh yeah, like I love that stuff. Count me in. I'm in. And then I looked at the date, Minky, and it was just conflicting with something that I had going on for work. So I declined. And then the next morning I got out of bed. I'm like, wait a second. If I keep doing things the way that I'm doing them right now, that's going to lead to just sameness for the rest of my career. I need to like move stuff around and I need to get myself to that training and try something new. And really like it was this awakening, like quite literally and metaphorically. So I marched back into work and I'm like, I'm going to this thing. HR told me, oh, it's already filled. I'm like, yeah, right. Whatever. I don't care. I'm going. So the day of, I show up, essentially insert myself into the training. No big deal. The guy running it said no problem. And no joke, Minky, from that day, it was like September 14th, 2014, my whole life changed. Why? Because 10 minutes into this training that these people are running, for public speaking, all that stuff, I realized two things within 10 minutes. A, this content is amazing. I love it. And And two, these people up there running this training, they are making money doing this. This is their job. And I love public speaking. The girl next to me was like, "Are you enjoying this? Because you seem like you're enjoying it. My manager forced me to come here. What is going on?" And that is another realization I had, which is I can do something with this skill.
Mm.
And so because I love it so much, I signed up for kind of this mentoring session with who turned out to be the founder and owner of that company. And within a year, I'm coaching with them. I'm traveling the world. I go to Hong Kong Meta or Facebook at the time. I go to Hong Kong to do like trainings for Facebook and running that kind of stuff. So I know I might have skipped over a lot of details, but I'm trying to kind of keep it concise for your listeners and for you. But really just walking into that training, realizing that this is something I can do became something I was doing and literally opened so many doors for me. So let me just pause here so you can direct me to the next area because there's so much to talk about here.
I love the point that I think at work, because things can get so in the weeds, it's really easy to become complacent. I love that you had that realization. Hey, keep exploring, keep the curiosity open.
Definitely. Isn't it so easy to look at your calendar and say, like, oh, I'm so busy, I can't go to that thing? Yeah,
Mm.
but that thing might be really important, right? So I like to follow this principle in my life. I called it following the thread. It's like the universe was dangling this idea in front of me, and I was either going to like ignore it or take a look and pull on the thread. And I pulled on the thread. And literally, that's why I'm sitting here today, like 10 years later at Meta, because I pulled on that thread. The universe is constantly going to show us things that we are interested in and could possibly really help us out. It's really up to us to kind of look for those things and say yes to the invitations instead of, oh, I'm too busy, or like a fear-based reaction, etc. So yeah, the universe presented me with an amazing opportunity and I pulled on that thread.
Love it. During this time, so when you started the Own the Room, your career satisfaction takes like a 90-degree increase, but also your life satisfaction increases significantly with the meeting of the love of your life. How important was meeting your husband in life satisfaction?
Yeah, it was really, it's funny because when you look at the grid, those things do happen seemingly simultaneously.
Mm.
So the cool thing about meeting my husband was, and I think this is all kind of related, right? I can't exactly point to how this stuff works, but the universe is kind of amazing. But the time that I met my husband, it was almost like I was coming out of the underemployment coma, if you will, and starting to kind of realize like, oh, there might be something else out there for me, but not really sure what it was. I meet my husband, and it was under very friendly pretense. It was through a group of friends, and so it was a bunch of people just hanging out. So there was really no dating pretense there. It just kind of naturally happened. And the moment I met him, it it's almost like he was wearing this like really nice suit. He's in tech sales, and him and his colleagues who were also part of the group were kind of talking about work stuff, and I kind of overheard that he was about to close this really big deal, and it was like kind of the biggest year of his sales career, all that kind of stuff. And just by him being him and talking about the things he's interested in and talking with his colleagues about work, he reminded me of my own ambition, right? And
Mm.
so just kind of seeing him in his element talking and all this kind of stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm ambitious too. I've just been kind of dormant. And so what's cool about that was what 10 years ago, even to this day, it's never that my husband's like, hey, you need to be more this or that, or you need to climb the ladder a bit more. It's just because of the way he is, which has very positively influenced me in my own career. And it's
Mhm.
almost like meeting him forced me to raise my own average, and all of these things happening with Own the Room essentially were happening simultaneously. So he got front row seat to that. I don't think he would have taken credit for that, but I'm here to tell him that he should take some credit because of the way he is. He raised my average, Minky, big time. And so, when you talk about that career satisfaction and life satisfaction spiking, when I made the transition into the Own the Room thing, and I'm about to say something very obvious, but sometimes you got to repeat these things. When you're happy with the work that you're doing, your satisfaction in life and work, it all kind of bleeds through. So the moment I kind of like stumbled on the gold mine of me being happy, public speaking and helping others do the same, the happiness just like went through the roof. And it coincided with meeting my husband and, you know, dating my husband. So it was it was just complete synergy of like career and life at the same time, which I think is completely related and not a coincidence.
I can definitely see how you see the universe working in your favor in a positive cycle. Would love to talk at this point about the other significant man in your life, your father. You mentioned him briefly. Were you two close?
Oh, my dad. Yeah, it's hard to find closeness in a vacuum because it's always very relative. Yes. So I would say we were close. I learned so much from him. If I have good vocabulary, it's from him. And what's amazing about both of my parents is that they're immigrants, right? So they came to America in the early 70s. And so for me to call out that my dad is really good at vocabulary, for instance, is kind of cool. It shows his intellectual curiosity because English was his second language, right? And so he was using words that I'm like, Dad, what is that word? And he'd force us to go look it up in the dictionary instead of just telling us. But yeah, I was close to my dad. When I look back at our relationship, he taught me really, really foundational, important things that when I look back at, or when I reflect on any of my successes, it's rooted in some of the things he taught me. For example, when you say, was public speaking a natural thing for you? I think in large part it is very natural to me because I learned fearlessness from my father. He also always encouraged us never to be afraid of anyone or anything, and that no matter how it might seem on the outside, we are all the same, regardless of life circumstance. Nobody's better than you, no one's worse than you. And so I think that continues to play a critical role in how I see myself in relation to others, how I see others in relation to me, etc. That's the one big one. And Minky, I think in homage to your awesome podcast about finance, he also taught us that you don't spend money you don't have, right? So you might need to do that to buy a house, maybe for a car, but whenever you don't need to spend money, you don't spend it if you don't have it, right? So I learned a very frugal mentality financially from my parents. And yeah, I think fearlessness and being careful with money are two of the biggest life lessons I got from my dad.
For someone that you learned so much from, the onset of mental illness towards the end of his life, was that gradual or sudden?
Yeah. So, yeah, it was pretty gradual, but I will say during the initial moments of it, it was so extreme. He
Mm.
just started saying things that when you're not experienced with mental illness, which at the time I was not, it's tricky because you're not really sure what's going on. And so until you're really initiated into what bipolar schizophrenia looks like, you're trying to kind of reason with the person, right? So it took a while for us to understand what was happening with my dad, who gradually over the course of 4 years just became more and more mentally ill, or at least like it looked like it was a gradual progression, or maybe it's something that was always there, but it wasn't something we saw until the last 4 years of his life. And so it's easy to look back on something and understand it, but as we were going through it, it was really difficult to understand what was happening, especially because he was extremely reluctant to go seek medical help. So yeah, I would answer that question by saying it was pretty gradual, but it just felt so extreme and so
Mm.
fast.
Thank you for sharing that. I know last time we discussed, you mentioned you don't like to look back in time, you prefer to look forward in time. But I would love to ask, given everything that you've experienced, if you were to go back to your younger self, how do you think you could have helped her or your parents differently?
Ooh, that's a good one. That is a really good one. It's funny. Cliches are a cliche for a reason, right? So the first thing that comes to mind with this amazing and very important question is, did you give the people in your life enough grace, right? So, of course, my older, more experienced self would look back and tell my younger self to give my parents a little bit more leeway, a little bit more grace, a little bit more understanding. Because really, when I think about their journey, they immigrated and essentially didn't even really know the language when they arrived. Maybe my dad a little bit more than my mom. They did something really tremendous. If I think about myself, like uprooting my life and moving to a different country where I pretty much don't know anything about how things work, et cetera, That's pretty tough, to put it mildly. So when I look back, Minky, it's like I really wish I gave my dad a little bit more consideration in terms of like just eased up on him a little bit. I know like all kids kind of give their parents a lot of grief and vice versa. But I wish I'd given them a little bit more understanding and like how much of a sacrifice like they made for us and to appreciate them a bit more.
Mm. Do you think there were also steps you wish you would have taken towards the end of their lives? You particularly mentioned things about just costs that you had not expected coming up.
So here's the remarkable thing about the way my parents prepped for the end. And I know this is a difficult topic for a lot of people. My therapist even advised me be very careful when you're talking about these things because, you know, people have a lot of feelings, as they should, around this topic. And so I just want to share with everyone it's difficult to talk clinically, right, about arrangements and all this kind of stuff, but it is really, really, really important. And it is a topic I feel like our society sweeps under the rug. So the thing is, we're all going to be part of that club at some point, right? Like taking care of something or someone or, you know, financial, court, wills, probate, all that stuff. So while it's hard, I think we should all talk about it. And that way it's less of a shock when unfortunately you do have to go through this. Okay, with that caveat there, luckily my father obviously was very financially savvy and knew that arrangements had to be made. So that my parents took plenty of measures to make this process for us. And I say us because I have three siblings that were handling the final arrangement. So my mother and father both like pre-bought their final resting places and paid for them. So that's a huge expense taken care of. Okay, so that's one. Number two is they were very clear with what they wanted for the end. Okay, so that there's no doubt there. There's no debate. My father also had when I say my father, it's because he really handled the finances and was kind of like the banker of the two, of the relationship, of the marriage. So my mom was a part of this the whole time, but my dad was really the running point guard on this. So my dad had an ironclad will that he actually talked with me a lot. He designated me as the executor, and he very much made clear, this is what I want. This is what I want to happen. This is how it's going to go. So there was essentially no doubt about how things were going to go. But even he knew that there was even one more step, Minky, that he could have taken to make this even more seamless for anyone handling the after. But he knew it. He just never did it. He knew that because he used to listen to Susie Orman tapes, and he really liked her a lot. And one of the bits that he got from her was like, set up a trust. That way, the trust, and it's not like I can go into deep definitions here, but the long and short of it is that once you set up a trust, it becomes kind of a separate entity versus attached to you as a person, right? So if you look it up, I'm sure there's a much better explanation. He knew that he should have done that. It's really just like legal paperwork and getting a lawyer and like doing all these things. And that way, like, it will avoid what I'll talk about in a second. But he just never got around to doing it, right? And by the time he was losing his mental faculties, that definitely, it was over, right? There was no way he was going to do any of that stuff. But the good news is he had a will. And so what happens is when somebody passes that has a will, it's not just you don't just go and execute the will. The judge has to kind of put their stamp of approval on the will and say, stamp, this is a sound, legal, binding document. We had to do that. And what's interesting is that my father passed away during COVID. And so you can imagine courts were kind of on standstill. And this is at the start of COVID. So no one really knew what was going on or how to handle, like procedures weren't really in place yet. So all that meant for our case, Minky, was that it was just delayed a bunch. But went to probate, did all that stuff, involves a lot of paperwork, like serving papers to my siblings so to make sure that they're notified that, hey, this judge is going to examine the legalities of this will. And if you have anything you want to say to this judge about this will, this is your chance to do it. There's like a Zoom call, etc. So went through all those procedures and like probated the will, got the judge's stamp of approval, and was able to kind of be the executor of the will based on what my dad wanted in the will because the judge said it was okay. That's called probate. And so probate is something you can avoid if you set up a trust. So the trust was the only kind of missing piece that my dad didn't do. But the truth is, Minky, like, My parents did 99% of the work necessary to make that end of life process as easy as possible for the people left behind.
Curious, having seen your parents deteriorate either mentally or physically, how has that impacted your thoughts on death and the miracleness of where we live?
Absolutely. And I will caveat that too by saying, because I come from an immigrant family, death is less of a delicate topic, right? It's
Oh,
something that has always been with us, for lack of a better term. My parents come from Egypt, and the mortality rate there is a bit higher than here. I don't have a more scientific way of saying that, but like what I'm trying to say really is that there's always been a death here and there with our extended family. And just because of the way I think I was brought up, seeing my parents' reactions to their family members passing away, it just both consciously and subconsciously was a thing that wasn't as delicate as I feel it is here. With no disrespect to American
mhm.
culture or anything like that, it's just not something we're more seeing here in America.
What was their reaction?
Just it's more factual, Minky, than
Mm.
emotional, right? So both of my parents, when they came to live in America, their parents or their mothers were still alive. Their fathers were not alive. Both of their mothers were still alive. And my mother wasn't able to go back to Egypt for her mother's death and
Oh.
funeral, etc. Just because of logistics
Mm.
and she needed to go to work, etc. So it just became so much more of a factual thing versus emotional. Of course she was sad, but she had to tend to her immediate family also. She had to go to work, etc. So it just became more of a thing that happened that my mother was very sad about versus like this like stop everything kind of thing. My dad was lucky enough to be able to go be with his family when his mother passed, but again, that was a circumstance versus like a priority, if that makes any sense. But to go back to your original question, it just made it even more real for me, Minky, that we need to be prepared for these things while they're not pleasant. We need to make it as easy as possible for those left behind. So, my sister and I have had very candid discussions about this is what will happen, what I need you to do in case, God forbid, something premature happens. I'm I am supposed to take care of her kids, if she passes. Of course, we don't want these things. But here's the thing, Minky. Like, if you talk about these things ahead of time, knock on wood, hopefully that kind of lessens the likelihood that you'll need it, right? To be as prepared as possible. So it just really made it more real for me. And it also just gave me that view from seeing what that end looks like and could look like for someone. It just kind of like really gives you that view of, this isn't forever, and you really are here to make life easier for yourself and for those you love and try to have a good time. Yes, of course, we get stressed by the day to day. That's inevitable. We're human. We can't avoid that. But it will give you some perspective, as it did for me.
I love that. I once heard a really good quote that said, one really good way of showing love for your loved ones is making the preparations in advance. So when the time comes, you allow them to grieve and just grieve and not think about logistics.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as I was talking to various parties involved in these transactions. For instance, because my parents had prearranged through their church their final resting place. Imagine May 2020, so the pandemic was just getting started. My dad already had his spot. Can you imagine how stressful that would have been? I know a lot of cemeteries and places like that ran out of room. They had
Mm.
people, I know there were a lot of situations, but none of that applied to us because of the arrangements my father had made. So the grief in a normal moment would have been tremendous. The grief in that moment would have been very stressful, and I don't even know if there would have been a solution. That's kind of what it sounded like. So, and you also unfortunately have people who take financial advantage of people in these vulnerable situations, which I learned a lot from talking to lawyers about probate, etc. That there are, unfortunately, this is the truth of the matter, there are financial predators out there who will take advantage of people in vulnerable positions. And this is one of the, if not the most vulnerable position someone can be in a time of grief and need.
Oh boy.
Sorry to get so heavy.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. That was not easy. So, while some personal tragedies were happening, if we take a look at your net worth graph though, it made some significant bumps up. Meta was a part of it. And then also your life satisfaction graph starts to take a increase, and only share if you're comfortable. One thing that I think was very interesting was the mental burden, as much as we love our parents, of seeing them suffer. And once that suffering passes, it's the capacity that you're able to open up in being able to take a breather. Can you share a bit about that?
Absolutely. Happy to, 100%. So I'll tackle the financial thing first, which is before I got into Meta, I'd never really been in the world of RSUs, which is like stock grants from your employer, and the tech life. Really, it was just a completely foreign kind of how employees can be treated mindset to me. So to quickly, though, bridge the gap with Own the Room, one of their biggest clients is Facebook, Meta. It's now Meta, but Facebook. At the time, it was Facebook. So because of the work that I was doing in Own the Room at Meta, because of that is how I ended up getting a job at Meta, right? And so just to bridge that for your listeners is that because I was public speaking and doing a lot of work at Meta, that's what led to the invitation to interview for a job at Meta, which I got 5 years ago. And now I'm at my second role at Meta. So when I entered the Meta world, it was just kind of like, imagine Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz going from black and white to full color and like glittery slippers and all that. That's how I feel like my transition was when I went from like regular jobs. I don't know. Hopefully that nobody's upset by me saying that, but like into the Meta world. To me, like the employee experience at Meta is just kind of like off the charts, something you can only dream of. And a big part of that is compensation, which includes RSUs, restricted stock units for those who don't know that acronym. And so, yeah, my financial position in life really took off once I started working for Meta, both because of salary and because of RSUs. You've seen the the share price really just like steadily inclining. So that has a direct impact on my financial situation. Now, to go back to the question of my father who died in 2020, yes, a big, if not maybe like 89% of my brain capacity and heart capacity during the 4 years that he was declining was dedicated to like not necessarily making sure he was okay, but like, what is my job to make this experience for him as painless as possible, which was very difficult because not only was he not complicit in his own care, but he was oftentimes combative and really difficult to just talk to, be with. He'd say, yes, I would love to get help and like live somewhere. And then we would do all this research and then he would say, no, I don't want that. So it was really difficult. So yeah, it was very difficult to see him suffering, and he was pretty much wasting away, Minky. Like he wasn't eating, he wasn't drinking because he thought, food might have been tampered with, the kind of paranoid thoughts that someone in that condition has. And he was really suffering. I mean, there was absolutely no joy in his life. It was just complete fear. He thought the house was on fire. I mean, it was really, really difficult. So I know this might be difficult for some people to hear and or understand, but when he passed, I know that he was relieved. And because of that, I was relieved, right? And so being able to have closure with him no longer suffering did make me more available to enjoy the life that I'm living right now. And I think of him every day, and I'm so glad he's not suffering. I know he's like reunited with my mom. And so, yes, as difficult as it is maybe for people to understand that, it did create some relief with my siblings and I to know that he was no longer suffering and that like we could move on with our lives without having to worry, is he okay?
One thing that I thought we'd also touch on was as your career satisfaction and life satisfaction continue to increase, there was the Meta layoffs. You were affected by it, but you were hired right back. Was that like to the same team or?
Okay, totally different team. And what's amazing, Minky, I'd love to tie this in too, is that when I'm thinking about the Own the Room moment, the public speaking, this is awesome, all that kind of stuff. And I think about this moment, these two very pivotal moments in my career, Minky, came about because I was super interested in something, relatively good at it, and kind of followed the path of what the universe revealed to me as an opportunity. So you heard the Own the Room stuff. Now it's time for the Meta Part 2 stuff. So think back to, I think it was the summer of 2021 when Mark Zuckerberg essentially revealed his vision for the metaverse. And I remember watching that. It was a company all hands. I just remember watching that all hands and just being blown away. I remember I was like eating lunch and I kind of stopped mid chew, which is pretty major for me because I love eating. I stopped mid chew and I was just completely transfixed by A, what he was saying, and B, he was also showing visualizations of the metaverse and, you know, what his vision was for virtual reality, mixed reality, etc. I was just blown away. I was watching the presentation and listening to him talk about the future, and I knew that I was not just looking at the future of Meta, Minky, I was also looking at the future of how we work, how we communicate, how we interact. Like, this looked to me like the next big wave of change in communication. Not that I knew what this meant, but I said, whatever this is, I want to work on that and I want to be involved in this. And so what that ended up translating to, Minky, is because I'm a learning professional, I do enablement. What that eventually meant was I was doing these learning pilots like in the metaverse, right? So you put on a headset, join a virtual workroom and have a virtual classroom and you're conducting this learning session. So that led to me doing that as like my extracurricular project at Meta because I told my manager I want to be involved in this. And I just had such a blast with it and just was like, I need to figure out how to make this my full-time job with no idea how to do that. So, you know, I just started lightly networking with what is called Reality Labs at Meta. It's the people who like devote themselves to this space and work. And so that was in 2021, worked on that for like a year and change. And then November 22 hits and I was in the first wave of layoffs. Heartbroken, but understood, right? That's business. I've been laid off in my life before. It's not personal. It's a balance sheet that needed to be balanced. I totally got that. But of course, because Meta was the employment experience of my life, I kept looking at Meta jobs, not really sure what was going on. I knew there was a hiring freeze, etc., but certainly kept my eye on all of that. About 2 months into my layoff, I saw this job posted at Meta for partner enablement in the job that I have now. And I looked at it, I was like, that is the job I was dreaming up. And asked for an internal referral, which I got from one of my colleagues who is still here, and the rest is history. I'd never had, Minky, like such an enjoyable interview process. I mean, who says that, right? The interview process was incredible because it was just so in line with A, who I am, and B, like the thing that I expressed interest in and did. And because I had done this work before already, I've already done this kind of stuff. I speak the language, I know Meta, and I can kind of like fill in the dots with what I think this job is. It was just like kind of like, all right, you're hired. So I got the job and now I'm at the company that I love in a job that I love. So it's like the best possible part of the quadrant you can be in.
And the rest is history because your graph like goes out of the charts at this point, both in terms of career satisfaction and life satisfaction. I love it.
It's really cool and it's really inspiring, even to myself. I'm like, yeah, when you're interested in something, like make that known, right? Luckily, I had a manager here who encouraged me and saw out opportunities for me and connected the dots for me to work on this stuff. Because of that, here I am.
There you are. Thank you so much for sharing everything, Mary. This was fantastic.
I had such a blast. Minky, thank you so much for the invite. I feel like we could kind of rabbit hole into any of those topics. So when you need someone else, I'm here.
Love it. Awesome.